Hi everyone, and welcome back to Rudy's 1/6 World for the next installment in our Retrospective Figure Showcase series. And for today's edition, we'll be jumping into the world of Predator 2, and we'll be looking at the Guardian Predator 6-scale figure, convention exclusive, released by Hot Toys. So, there was a time when Hot Toys had another cash cow, and it wasn't Iron Man, it wasn't Star Wars, it was this Predator line. At one point, I think they were releasing different versions of the characters from the second movie, and they were aiming to give us almost a complete version of the Lost Tribe, which was famously showcased at the end of the movie when Danny Glover's Detective Harrigan comes face to face with that entire clan of Predators. So, Hot Toys did release this Guardian. They released the Shadow Predator, which I believe was another convention exclusive, the Lost Predator, which I do own and came in kit form, and they released the Elder Predator. Now, some of these characters were literally on screen for a minute, if that, in less than optimal lighting, so it's a little hard to gauge accuracy to what we saw on the screen. So for this one, we'll be focusing mainly on the figure itself. And before jumping to look at the piece, I will say, as a child of the 80s, the Predator franchise does have a special place in my heart. The original, to me, remains the best, followed very closely by the recent Prey movie. I did enjoy Predator 2, but I think when I first watched it, I was disappointed that Arnold wasn't back. But as I got older, I appreciated that we didn't just get a rehash of the original. So I started to really enjoy that more. And then I also did enjoy Predators with Adrian Brody. So overall, a fairly positive outlook on the series, with the Predator probably being the outlier that I wasn't really crazy about. So let's look at the Guardian and the overall package. And this is an interesting release with many aspects. Like, looking at the release, it looks like he comes with a lot of accessories, including some of his weapons, but a few of these are actually pieces that need to be connected to his armor. For example, the med pack and the blade holder from his leg. But it's a decent enough package that does give us a good amount of display options. And he does include that old style oval base Hot Toys used to include with their figures. I will say sometimes figures hold up really well, and sometimes pieces will show their age. This is a 13-year-old figure, and I think it is unfortunately showing some of that age. So let's go a little bit more in depth with the accessories, and we'll start things off with the weapons. And first up is the spear, which does articulate and is able to extend and collapse back into a smaller piece. Now, first off, the positives. The detail work on the center grip is incredible, showing some alien-like metal, as well as what looks like the screen with the Predator numbers for the countdowns, similar to what we've seen on the wrist gauntlets. The color apps are also great. Now, there is a but coming here. Overall, I think the piece is just too thick. It looks definitely oversized, and the function to allow you to extend the spear itself feels a little stiff. So you have to apply pressure, and with the delicate nature of some of the spikes here, it just feels like you need to be really careful to avoid any breaks. Next up, you get the throwing disc, and this is a nice piece. Paintwork here is really nicely done with that dark bronze metallic finish, and the detail work along the openings for the fingers are also really well done. It does also open slightly, similar to what we saw in the movie. It's a nice detail, but not something that's going to be super noticeable once you have the piece on display. But overall, I do have to appreciate the work that went into this, and this has to be my favorite of the weapons included. And it does connect to a holster on his leg armor. Moving away from his weapons, you do get the biomask, and this is one of the highlights of all the figures. Each mask tends to be unique, and you do get some personality there. This one has a very distinctive mouth portion with the clear lens eyes, more similar to the Berserker Predator eyes than the original mask that looked almost insect-like in nature. The forehead also has some very intricate detail work. This is one of the more elaborate masks I think we've seen. I do feel like it's missing some finesse in the detailing, but it does feel ancient and worn down with some weathered metallic paint apps and what looks like some pitting and denting. So looks good overall, but I will say I think it could have been a little better. Again, I think it's just a product of its time. The next piece is definitely my favorite, and that's the oxygen mask with the hose that can connect to the back of his armor. I like it because it's relatively unique and offers a nice alternate to the standard unmasked or masked look on these figures. And the details and paint apps here really do look great with the metallic bronze finish again, and even the rope portions along the front of the mask. The hose itself also looks well done with some almost scale-like texture, so it makes it feel alien enough. Next, you get two pieces for his armor, and I'm a little surprised that they weren't already included on the figure itself. First is the med pack that attaches to the figure's back. It doesn't open or have any other real features, so I guess you can have the figure holding it, but I'm just putting it on and leaving it on the armor. The other piece attaches to his lower leg armor, and I think it's supposed to hold a blade. It's really nicely painted and does offer some uniqueness to the armor, but I'm not sure what the function is other than it looks cool. And finally, you do get 2 additional hands to hold the spear and the disc, and they include pegs already in them, so I love that. It just makes things a lot easier when it comes to swapping things out. The one thing I will say about these hands, and it might be the way that they did the paint work, it almost feels a little too plastic and does feel like it's missing some detail work. Now, you also get 2 mandible pieces to create the closed-mouthed expression. Big highlight here with the teeth. Hot Toys used a translucent plastic to give them a very nice look. It definitely sets this apart a little bit. Now, the last accessory you get is a really nice one from one of the best Easter egg-filled scenes in the movie, and it's the skull of some alien hunted down by the predators that is held up in the trophy room that includes the iconic xenomorph. Now, this is a different skull, but looks amazing with all the detail work on the bone elements and the teeth, really giving you the feel of some heavy calcification. And it does pique your curiosity as to what this creature might have looked like, and opens the door to other predator hunts. Okay. With that out of the way, let's look at the figure itself, and we'll start with the sculpt. And it is really nice. The unique element here is definitely the skin tone, with a white or what looks like a very light gray paint scheme that blends into the darker spots on his forehead, and sort of the darker elements along the dreads. The mandibles are also looking amazing, again with that translucent plastic for the teeth and the iconic open mouth look. Eyes look good with that red hue, and the sculpt work along the dreads is really impressive. The dreads themselves are more of a rubber-like material, so they are a little annoying to work with, but the unique aspect of the sculpt here definitely overshadows that, and it does work here. It does look great. Now, as for the figure itself, as you can tell, he has double jointed elbows, and it's very noticeable. For me, it's never been an issue because I like to pose my figures, so I'm a huge fan of that feature. But I will admit, here it feels like they could have at least tried to hide it a little better. And not to be negative, but this is where we'll start getting into some of the issues I have with this figure. I think the shoulder and chest armor are all nicely sculpted and painted, and again, they give the figure presence. But the shoulder cannon does feel a little floppy, and it's supposed to pivot so you can aim the cannon in different directions. Mine is stuck, and I don't want to force it because I'm afraid it's just going to shear the ball joint off, and that'll be that. The neck piece looks good as well with all the bone necklaces, but when posing, that piece just doesn't sit nicely on the neck, so it's just tough to work with. The rest of the kit has some hanging elements from the waist armor, and they look okay, but it almost feels like it should have been more mixed media, with maybe softer plastic or fabric. As it stands, it almost feels a little cheap. I do appreciate that it isn't a heavy pleather figure though, because I don't have to worry about deterioration over the life of having it. But again, just some of the pieces feel like they could have been done a little bit better. Now, one of the biggest issues I have here are the wrist gauntlets. The one on the right is the standard one with the blades, and it looks decent, but the plastic blades feel very brittle and like they could snap at any moment. They also do extend out, but usually we get an alternate hand that's a closed fist so that the blades don't interfere with the hand. We didn't get that here, so it's one less viable display option in my opinion. The other really annoying thing is the fit of the gauntlets themselves. On both hands, they aren't secure on the arm, and they just flop around, rotating easily. So when you're trying to pose, you're also dealing with this piece that just doesn't hold its position. So it can be a little awkward, and it needs a lot of patience. But without a doubt, that was one of the parts of this figure that I found myself repeatedly annoyed with, and just as I was working with it, I could feel my frustration growing. The other thing I will say is that while the figure does articulate well, the joints on the shoulder do feel stiff as well. And it's one of those moments where you might be close to getting an amazing pose, but it feels like if you push the joint just that bit more, it's going to snap. I did take a step back from the figure during posing because, like I said, I was just frustrated with trying to get it to look decent with its poses. Looking at the video after the fact, I do think it looks good, and I think the figure does achieve some really interesting looks, especially once the figure is all suited up with the mask, be it the full bio one or the partial oxygen, and once he's holding all the weapons. It looks good, which is interesting because when handling the figure, it did feel a little on the cheaper side. I wish I could elaborate on that a little bit. It just felt very much like almost a chunk of plastic, and I think with the ill-fitting components, that only made it feel even cheaper than it really was. But once it's set up, I do have to admit, I do like the look of it. I think there's a lot of flexibility in how the figure can be displayed, essentially with 4 different looks for the sculpt, be it the helmeted, the partially masked with the oxygen gear, or with the open or closed mandibles. Throw in all the weapons, and you really do get a ton of flexibility in how you want to pose this guy up and how you want to display him. One of the questions I have is how I'm going to permanently display it. I like the biomask again because it's very unique and very different from the ones we got with the Super Predators or the Classic. So you almost want to display that piece, but the oxygen mask is also a nice element that would 100% set this figure apart from any of the other ones in my collection. And this is one thing I'm interested in as I display this. It's not having all the Predators look similar. I want some variety with the masks, with some masked, some unmasked. So this oxygen kit does create a very individualized display option. So overall thoughts on this figure. I'm not disappointed I have him. I think with patience, he really can look good, and I think from an aesthetic point of view, he still holds up. But I would be lying if I said I was in love with this, and that's just a frustration I felt during posing, and with some of the choices Hot Toys made here. The biggest culprit being the loose-fitting armor, that just felt like a no-go. But for a figure based on a character with such limited screen time, it's nice to have him and flesh out that Predator collection. Now, this is a line that has gone totally dormant. I did have hopes at some point that Hot Toys or someone would make a figure from Prey, because that was a very distinctive Predator with a great opportunity for accessories. But at this point, I think it's clear that that ship has sailed. Look, I hope I'm wrong and that someone surprises us at some point, but realistically, I don't anticipate getting a figure of that version, unfortunately. And even listening to Inart and some of their interviews, I don't sense the excitement for this license, which is a shame because I would love to see a modern take on a Predator figure with all the advances we've seen over the past few years. But at least we did have a good run, and even with the frustration, these still look good and make for a really decent display option. So, not my favorite Predator figure, but also not the worst I've had in my collection. And it still looks good. Just needs patience. So I'm happy to have him in the set. But if you're a Predator fan looking to pick one of these figures up, unless you were a super fan or a completist, I don't know that I'd recommend this one. I think the Classics and even the Super Preds are better figures, so there are other opportunities to own good Predators out there. So that was a quick look at the 6-scale Guardian Predator from Hot Toys. As always, thanks for watching, and if you are enjoying the content, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing, and we'll touch base on the next video.